we're going to work from the angle of CompTIA certification. That's not the only way to get tested and qualified on these topics of penetration testing. Our friends at EC Council have a certification that's been around forever. It's called Certified Ethical Hacker. Our buds at Offensive Security, the folks behind Kali Linux, have a certification that's an offensive security certified professional, which is a 24-hour pen test to pass that, get that credential. It's brutal that you actually do this for 24 hours to get that credential. So there may be a slightly friendlier way to do this, to get a qualification that is well known and well respected. And as you see the image on the screen of what is happening over with our friends at CompTIA, and I'll make frequent reference to CompTIA materials in this presentation. We're really going in that direction rather than some of the others. Keep in mind that New Horizons, and we're talking globally at this point, all over our global brand, we are one of the major training partners of that remarkable organization called CompTIA, the Computing Technology Industry Association. They simply wish to be known by their acronym these days, so we'll call them CompTIA. So as you see the credentials that are available in the technical certification paths, starting with ITF, that's IT fundamentals off to the left, a technical practitioner who's got fairly decent amount of experience probably does not need the IT fundamentals training. That's for absolute rookies. We assume that you are coming into this with a fairly basic level of skill, and we need to improve upon that. Excellent. If you've already got a skill level equivalent to what we call the core, A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus, usually in that order, well done. You can go past the core at that point and take one of the infrastructure pathways or cybersecurity pathways. So we want to concentrate on what is basically my turf in the New Horizons universe, which is this lower right corner of the diagram called the cybersecurity pathway. Whether you have done those core exams, A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus, or you simply come into this with an equivalent level of knowledge, we would like to get you interested in either Pen Test Plus or CYSA, which is Cybersecurity Analyst Plus. They always tag a plus onto the end of the name of the thing. So if it's the cybersecurity analyst credential, that's really the incident responder. You are responding to the criminal hacker. You're responding to the data breach. You're responding to some awful thing that has happened. And you have to do this with a sense of urgency. There's even a forensic context to that. You could be involved in investigations as part of your incident response. And we've covered some of those details in some prior webcasts. Pen Test Plus, yeah, it's where we are today. This is a penetration testing credential, assuming a solid technical background, the equivalent of the CompTIA core, A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus. And if you want to be that person who actually gets the authority to test security with permission always of the owner of the network or the owner of the resource. Some of these things could be done inside your organization. A fairly common approach in pen testing certifications is that you play the role of the contractor or the vendor. You are the person who gets authorization to break somebody else's security. How fun is that? Never, ever with malicious intent. We do not hire criminals to do this. We hire people who have the skill set to play the role of the criminal hacker. How would an organization's security posture look to somebody on the outside who has never been exposed to what is inside that network? So it may not be an employee of that company. It can actually be somebody hired as a contractor or a vendor. And one of the things that I've seen as a trend in penetration testing in all the decades that I've been involved with this, we used to be able to get away with this as a lone wolf mercenary penetration tester. A self-employed independent contractor could set up rules of engagement, get all the necessary permissions, cover the legal issues, and then get to work hammering away at a company's security. We don't see a lot of that anymore. We don't see lone wolf mercenary pen testers. We see people working in teams of penetration testers where everybody knows a little about a lot, and then they know a lot about a little. We hire specialists in a variety of operating systems and network technologies. We hire social engineering specialists. We work together in groups. We work in teams, usually in the modern penetration test. And so if we are looking to staff those penetration testing teams, we are usually looking for not just some good experience, but we're looking for credentials. We're looking for some evidence that somebody has mastered the craft to the point that they could pass a tough but fair certification exam. So Pen Test Plus from CompTIA, Certified Ethical Hacker from EC Council, and a few of the others that deal primarily with pen testing are considered to be those tough but fair certification exams. You could go all the way in the cybersecurity pathway and end up with a credential called CASP, that is CompTIA Advanced Security Practitioner. We still take that solid technical background that you demonstrate in Security Plus, Pen Test Plus, Cybersecurity Analyst, and we put a management level overlay on that. So in that exam, you still have to consider pen testing as well as incident response. But in that exam, you're not necessarily the technologist doing the heavy lifting. You are typically the manager of the effort. You're the leader of the team who gets this stuff done. And all of these credentials at this point are fairly well known and well respected. And when I say well respected and well known, it's not just out there in the industry. One of the reasons many of you may be here for this presentation, especially if you have come in through what we call NHDOD. It is our group of specialists who help us meet the needs of the Defense Department for certification and qualification and training. You are probably familiar with a regulation called 8570, and my buddy Patrick Lane over at CompTIA has done this blog post where he breaks it down. This is the justification, even after all of these years, even a couple of decades at this point, that Uncle has had these requirements. They update requirements every now and then, and we have to go in and check to make sure, do our qualifications meet that current standard for 8570 compliance? So if you are in the military, in active duty or the reserves, or even working with the military, it's not unusual for somebody to transition out of military service and then get a job with a defense contractor, or maybe stay in the reserves for a while. Yeah, even in some of those allied occupations, if you're working with Uncle rather than working for Uncle, you may have to pay attention to these qualifications. And certainly if you're in the military, Uncle wants you to get this stuff done. So there is this breakdown over in the CompTIA blog about which of the credentials match which level in the 8570 doctrine. So yeah, from the fairly basic A+ all the way through CompTIA Advanced Security Practitioner, these things count to meet those requirements. And there we are with Pen Test Plus. In the analyst role, we see it again in the incident responder role. We see it again in the auditor role. And cybersecurity analyst as well is an equivalent level of difficulty. And there is some overlap definitely across all four of those credentials. You get some basic training in Security Plus about pen testing, vulnerability assessment, and similar things, plus all the other security topics. Then you get to put that stuff to work in Pen Test Plus, which is our focus today, cybersecurity analyst. And we hope you go all the way with this and do CASP. So one of the most basic assumptions that you will see in your certification training for those credentials and others, it's the distinction between vulnerability assessments and penetration testing. In fact, when we show you some practice questions before we're done, you'll see one that actually points that out. And if you've had some CompTIA exams before or similar exams from similar vendors, EC Council exams, you know they're always going to try to trip you up, confuse you, and mislead you on things that look and sound the same. They're not going to give it away. You have to earn it on the test. So one of the most fundamental assumptions in penetration testing training is that we have to distinguish between a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test. You don't need to hire contractors and vendors from the outside to do all of your vulnerability assessments. This really is the distinction between the two. So if you are that internal practitioner, you have a supervisory role, especially a network administrator, system administrator, maybe a cybersecurity analyst. If you consider yourself to be a day-to-day defender of the network, you protect and secure the information, you protect and secure the IT environment, you protect and secure the employees who work there, the physical security, all of this stuff fits together under the heading of vulnerability assessment. If this assessment is done by internal personnel, that is not necessarily a penetration test. Vulnerability assessment is generally done when we deploy new or updated systems or new vulnerabilities have been identified. security breach has actually occurred, or we need to document the security state of systems. This is generally a calendar item in an IT department. If your organization is big enough and paying attention to rules of governance, your organization may have even split the roles of information security management and IT management. So in a small business, maybe a few techies get all of this done. We go to a larger organization and we find that the information security manager is not the same person as the IT manager or the administrator of the IT network. So it'll work differently in different organizations. But one of the things that we tend to see for vulnerability assessments as we go through these phases of collecting security information, storing it, organizing it, analyzing, and ultimately reporting on what we found, assuming that we are aware of current vulnerabilities and current threats, you can make this a calendar item, maybe once a quarter. We have technical personnel doing assessments of vulnerabilities in operating systems and applications, the network itself, even the human element, as the human element is always going to be the weakest link in security. Internal personnel doing vulnerability assessments, that's fine. You don't need contractors and vendors to do this, but I do want to point out a rather unusual circumstance, which would indicate that it's not a calendar item. Maybe you do this 4 times a year as a regularly scheduled thing, and then here comes somebody from management who says, excuse me, crew, we need an additional vulnerability assessment, and we need you to focus on these things in this list. Wait a minute, we did a vulnerability assessment 6 weeks ago. The next one will be due at the end of the calendar quarter. Why do we need to do an additional vulnerability assessment? Management might say, I can't tell you. It's got to be our little secret for now. Just get this done. What's happening behind the scenes? It's a merger. It's an acquisition. Somebody is considering investing in your organization. They've recruited a private investor. Maybe you're going public. Maybe it's time to pop that initial public offering. You get an underwriter. You get ready to sell your stock to the public on a stock exchange. Whoops, that's a pleasant surprise when that happens. I would have appreciated knowing about that in advance if I am responsible for security in this network. So management might come to these practitioners who do vulnerability assessments and say, keep this quiet. But we do need an additional assessment of vulnerability. All right, we follow those instructions and we get this done. And we will see before we are done today some methodology that could be used to get those assessments done. Methodology is always testable on this sort of exam. And we have our reasons why we might or might not use automation in scanning for vulnerabilities. Automation is easy to use, relatively low cost. We've got some really smart apps these days that can help you hunt down vulnerabilities. I'll show you a couple here in just a bit. Disadvantages of simply trusting the software is that you get false positives and false negatives. It's not as creative as penetration testing because you cannot account for that out-of-the-box thinking that a really skilled hacker would have against your network. If it is time for you to assess vulnerabilities in your network, with a variety of smart pieces of software, that's great. You also need to manually verify those vulnerabilities. So before we show you some things specific to penetration testing, I want to give you a little exposure to some of the tools of the trade, and I will send you here a very important link. I'm going to drop this into the chat window. sectools.org. Please grab that link. And our colleagues over on the marketing side, Jesse and Terry, if you're dropping links into the Facebook side of this or the LinkedIn side of this, please make sure you grab that link and distribute that link. That is very important. It would take you some time to go hunt down the top 125 tools. If you did this on your own, there's somebody who's on it. Fyodor. We call him Gordon Lyon in real life, but he is known by his ethical hacker handle, Fyodor. Good dude who does some amazing work. And for many, many years, he has run this survey online called sectools.org. It's security geeks like us who get to participate in the survey and vote for our favorite tools. And the things with the most votes get bumped up to the top of the list. So there's Wireshark, there's Metasploit, several tools that we're going to mention in this presentation. There's Nessus. What an awesome commercial product for finding and fixing vulnerabilities. And you can certainly throw some automation into that. If you do not have the budget for an expensive commercial tool, maybe some open source tools will be helpful. So several of these in the list are free and open source tools. You see one a little further down called OpenVAS. So let's consider this homework, please. If you are going to take a class with us to get your skill set up to date for penetration testing and vulnerability assessment and similar activities, or if you're going to pursue the certification on your own, or even just wish to improve your skill set, improve your marketability, maybe meet those 8570 requirements if you work for Uncle, you are expected to know several tools of the trade. Well, this one tends to win in those discussions, and this is the one you would tend to see in the labs. We really do not have time for labs in a 2-hour presentation, but if you come to class with us and we take a week to do Security Plus or Pen Test Plus or Certified Ethical Hacker or similar training, we're going to wear you out with this tool called OpenVAS. We're going to wear you out with tools like Nmap and Wireshark and some of the others that are free and open source and awesome. So there are no unpleasant licensing issues. So yeah, if you do this in class with us, we actually put you in some virtual machines and you actually get practice with the tools. So in your professional practice, if you have to come up with a quick and easy solution for scanning for vulnerabilities inside that network perimeter, it is hard to beat OpenVAS if you do not have a significant budget for this. Even if you do have a budget, you may get some benefit here from this awesome open source tool. And one of the comments that we generally get when we first show you the tool called OpenVAS in a demonstration in a lab, perhaps in one of the 5-day classes, if somebody has seen some of this stuff before and they're familiar with a lot of the tools, a pretty common comment about OpenVAS is, wait a minute, this looks like Nessus. Did they copy Nessus? Is somebody ripping off Nessus? Are they ripping off this thing over from our friends at Tenable? No, it's some of the same people involved in both projects. You could consider that tool called OpenVAS to be the open source fork of some of the code that is involved with Nessus. So yeah, you can pay for a license and get the commercial version. You can simply use the open source version called OpenVAS. Either way, you should be familiar with several of those tools of the trade, and we will mention several of them as we continue. So if vulnerability assessment based on vulnerability scanning is typically going to be that internal activity done by your internal security personnel, and maybe that's you, we now have to distinguish between that and penetration testing, which will be the focus of Pen Test Plus from CompTIA, and it's mentioned in several of their certifications, Certified Ethical Hacker from EC Council. That's all about penetration testing. So if it's a real penetration test rather than just a vulnerability assessment, the goal is to evaluate security by actually attacking the system. Now, it's never with the intent of damaging anything. This is really a simulation of the behavior of the criminal hacker outside the network, if it is that true black box penetration test. And we'll show you that color code here in just a minute. So if it's a black box pen test, we actively test and bypass security controls. We exploit system vulnerabilities. So you have to know where the vulnerabilities are. You have to know what is likely to cause a vulnerable condition. So this may actually involve some vulnerability scanning. But then you get to act on what you found in your vulnerability scans. You take a vulnerability scan one step further, and now you are penetration testing by really intruding into the network. Is this criminal behavior? If I run Nmap and Wireshark and I run all of my cool tools and I find a way that a hacker could get into the network, and I find that out just by scanning. We'll show you Nmap here in just a bit. We've got some tools that would show us some obvious and even not so obvious vulnerabilities that could be seen from outside the network. So if I fire up my copy of Nmap, and I know the URL of your company, if you work at yourawesomecompany.com, so I fire up Nmap or some other scanner, and I point it to www.yourawesomecompany.com, and Nmap shows me a big list of the ports that are open on your firewall, the protocols that are in use, the services that are associated with those ports, and I see that you have a port open for insecure web traffic, the old port 80 hypertext transfer protocol with no encryption. It was the fundamental protocol of the World Wide Web once upon a time. There's no protection on port 80. That's not the encrypted port that we use for web traffic. So if I see you've got port 80 open, and Nmap will tell me that, but I do not see port 443 open. Whoa, you've got traffic into and out of something that has exposure to the internet, but it's not protected by encryption because the encryption is not possible on port 80. Game on. If I'm the criminal hacker, that is going to be a source of exploit. If I have Nmap and similar tools that tell me you're running some old, outdated protocol for email, simple mail transfer protocol, but you're not using one of the later, better flavors of protection in the email. You have some old busted service that is not properly encrypted, or maybe not encrypted at all. Jackpot. If I am the criminal hacker, I have found an exploit. What if I'm not the criminal hacker? What if I'm a legitimate security pro? So are you. So am I. This is what we do. We get permission to scan for those vulnerabilities and exploit the vulnerabilities. So what if you did not give me permission? You're at yourawesomecompany.com. I fire up my tools and I do a scan of your network perimeter. Have I committed a crime at that point? Nope. If I take what I have learned from Nmap, if I see these insecure protocols, I see these services, I see these openings in the firewall, I get an indication that you have a careless employee who may be subject to social engineering. And I believe there is an exploit that could be run there. Is that a crime to figure that out? No, this stuff may even be in the public domain. It's the exploit without permission that is criminal behavior. So we are always going to make sure that we have permission before we do these things. And at that point, game on. Having been given permission and working within a scope of behavior agreed upon in advance, you get this done and you report on what you found. When we compare penetration testing to vulnerability assessment, we would see penetration testing is less common. It's more intrusive because the goal is not just to find a vulnerability, multiple vulnerabilities usually. The goal is to actually exploit the vulnerability. So you might consider penetration testing to really be a validation of what was found in a vulnerability assessment. It's an objective measurement, tends to be a combination of multiple vulnerabilities examined to provide a better understanding of vulnerability. Why is it less common if it's a penetration test compared to a vulnerability assessment? It's expensive. We don't do this for free. When I get these career development questions, Mr. Tibb, I'm just getting started in penetration testing. I got my Security Plus and I want to be a certified ethical hacker. I want to be a Pen Test Plus credential holder from CompTIA. But nobody will hire me yet because I don't have any experience. How do I get started in penetration testing? And I get the same question about forensics. How do I get started if nobody will hire me without experience? Okay, let's get the qualification. And maybe the first few times you have to give it away. Find a nonprofit organization in your community. Find a charity. Find somebody who maybe is running on a very limited budget, probably not a commercial entity. Maybe let's keep it on the nonprofit side. Find some charitable organization that simply does not have the money to hire professional penetration testers. They might not even have a full IT staff. And so you make this presentation, get legal advice first. But you go to this local charity, this local nonprofit, you say, look, I realize you don't have a budget for this. The fact is, criminal hackers would love to get in and get your goodies just as much as they would love to get in and compromise a commercial environment. So with your agreement and with your permission and with your approval, here's what I would like to do for you. I would like to run my tools. I would like to get permission to kind of poke around at your network perimeter. And if I find vulnerabilities that might get you in trouble, I will give you some guidance on fixing those vulnerabilities. And I will work with your IT pros to get this done. Okay, sounds good. What do we owe you? Nothing. You don't necessarily have to volunteer all of that information. This is my first pen test. Right? The goal is to get a letter of recommendation. The goal is to get something on official letterhead that says, yeah, we hired Ensign Sparky to get this done. And Ensign Sparky did an awesome job. So well done. Thanks. That goes in the file. And you can use this to jump over to other assignments. Eventually, the goal is to actually get paid for doing this. You may have to give it away the first few times. The pen test compared to the vulnerability assessment is less common because the organization should expect to pay for it when this is done by an actual penetration testing team. And it is more intrusive because the goal is not just let's find vulnerabilities outside the network perimeter looking in. The goal may actually be to get in, not just logically, but physically. Some of the penetration testing activities actually involve your physical presence in the organization, perhaps with some pretext why you are really there is not necessarily connected to why you appear to be there. So it does tend to be more obtrusive and more of an objective measurement because you do not have that bias that comes from already working inside the organization. A skilled pen tester will follow the methodology of the real criminal attacker, including the preparation and research stages, profiling, reconnaissance. All of that has to be done in the appropriate order. The difference between a penetration test and the real attack by criminal hackers is obviously the intent. You get explicit permission of the target organization. Should you go to the IT director? Not necessarily, because when corporate management agrees, yeah, we're going to hire this pen test team, we're going to hire you to get this done, you're not just testing technical security precautions. You're not just testing to see are the firewall rules correct? Are you using the appropriate encryptable protocols? Are we doing everything technically necessary to protect this stuff? You may actually be called upon to test the human element. And that's not necessarily just the careless and occasionally clueless non-technical end user. You may actually have to test the security awareness of the IT pros who protect that network on a daily basis. And I have been on both sides of that issue. I've been the pen tester who had to shut up about the fact that I was there, why I was there. My goal was to get as far into the network as I could and prove that these things were vulnerable and give the organization advice on how to fix the problem. I have also been that IT director who responded to the attack as if it was real because I didn't know it was fake. I was not informed by management that they had contracted with a penetration testing team. So because they did their jobs correctly on the attacking side, there was nothing to indicate to me that this was a penetration test. So I had to respond, and my team had to respond to what we believed was actually an attack by criminal hackers. I was furious when I was called into the boardroom and presented with the report. Mr. Tibb, have a seat. Remember those criminal hackers that you encountered last week? They weren't criminal hackers at all. I'd like to introduce you to the pen testing team from Spiffco Security. Yeah. And we all had a big laugh about it after, but in that time and place, I was not happy that I was not informed that a penetration test had actually been agreed to at the executive level. And that's a pretty common thing. You go in as a contracted pen tester, you work for yourself or you work some other company who does this. The day-to-day defenders of the network may not have been informed that you are there. So they will assume that it's an actual criminal attack. Make sure you have that get out of jail free card, as we will talk about in some legal issues here in just a bit. The goal is to write a report that generally comes in two sections. One, executive summary. The executives who sign off on a pen test really don't need a lot of technical detail. They just want to make sure they got what they paid for. The technologists who will fix the problems that you found need more technical detail. And that's a really important thing. I will even say exam alert on this. If you're taking Pen Test Plus, Security Plus, Cybersecurity Analyst, Certified Ethical Hacker, any of those exams dealing with penetration testing, keep in mind, if this is a contracted activity, in other words, you get hired from outside to pen test the network, you deliver the best advice that you can based on what you found in the assessment. You do not stick around to fix the problem. You get paid for the work and you move on to the next assignment. And now it is the responsibility of the people who operate and defend those systems on a daily basis to take your advice, and they fix the problem. You have moved on at that point. You'll hear us say things like black box, gray box, white box penetration test. These terms are all over the exams these days. Typical focus of something like Pen Test Plus or Certified Ethical Hacker is that true black box test. That's the one that emulates the behavior of a criminal attacker outside the network who knows nothing about your organization. So they have to go through all of the phases of profiling and reconnaissance. They have to look to things that are in open source intelligence, which we'll talk about here in just a bit. The gray box test is where there is some helpful information provided to the pen testers, but not all of it. So they still have to do some level of reconnaissance. The white box test, that's fun. This is the one where you get to emulate the behavior of the rogue insider, the geek gone wild. If you have an IT administrator, maybe a security practitioner inside your network, they're not happy with the job. They're the disgruntled employee who now becomes the disgruntled former employee. Now they've left your organization with some knowledge about what's going on inside your network. Whoops. Or even worse than that, you have the disgruntled employee who does not become the disgruntled former employee. You've got somebody who's not happy with the job. They've already quit the job in their own mind, but they're still physically present in your network. And that's the person who goes rogue. And that person is an administrator in an IT context. This is awful. So you may be called upon inside the organization to do that white box pen test, emulating the behavior of the rogue insider. Usually it's an administrator whose motivations have flipped and they decide they're going to do the maximum damage. They are going to escape with some sensitive information. They're going to take some things with them when they leave the organization. So in that case, if it's a white box pen test, the pen testers get all of the information that they need to get the job done in advance. They do not have to do these phases of profiling and reconnaissance from the outside. The gray box, meanwhile, tends to be the one that confuses people. Black box is pretty obvious. You emulate the criminal hacker behavior. White box is the rogue insider. Gray box is a little tricky. So if I were called upon to do a gray box pen test in your network, let's say management would be the ones who give permission, maybe the IT practitioners would be in on this. And we have this discussion. Mr. Tibb, we would like you to test our new e-commerce environment. We have recently changed the technology that we use for electronic commerce. We want an assessment of vulnerability. How good are our IT pros at defending our e-commerce platform against this criminal behavior from hackers on the outside? And I'd say, okay, give me some information. What is the range of IP addresses? Well, we're not telling you that. Okay, I can look that up. I've got DNS information available. Who are the persons responsible for your company's web presence? I need a technical contact, a billing contact, and an administrative contact. They say, nope, we're not giving you that information. You can find that information on your own. Okay, I'll use a Whois query to determine some of that. Tell me about the technology. If I'm called upon to test the technology, what is the brand of the web server? What's the brand of the database behind the scenes? What is server platform are we using? And if they say, dude, you're the hacker, you tell us. We're not giving you all of the helpful information. You have to find some of this out on your own. Okay, that's the gray box test. The attacker knows some valuable things, but not everything there is to know about the target. So as you prepare for penetration testing, we have to be prepared to answer these questions. Who commissions the test? It's not always IT managers or chief technology officers or chief information officers. Sometimes it is executive management. A compliance officer may have convinced the executive level, look, it's been a while since we had that true black box pen test. Here's a list of vendors. Pick one. We'll help you choose the right vendor. We want senior management generally to sign off on this. As I am looking over paperwork that sets up penetration testing, I love to see CEO signatures on those documents. I would also love to see that a corporate legal advisor has signed off on this, because there are some unpleasant legal issues if this goes bad. Who conducts the test? How will the test be conducted? What are the limitations of the test? What tools could be used? On the client side, who will be available in case of damage? Whoops. We certainly do not intend to damage anything, but it's always possible in a penetration test, because you have to go significant distance into the network to find and leverage these vulnerabilities, there is a possibility that you actually do some damage in a production network. This is awful. So Friday evening is often prime time for the beginning of a penetration test. If somebody's working an 8 to 5 Monday through Friday corporate sort of schedule, and the network tends to clear out between 5 and 6 in the evening on Friday, and we assume maybe even IT staff have gone home at the end of the day, and the network is not well defended and certainly not well populated over the weekend. All right, game on. Friday evening, there we are doing what we have been authorized to do. And it's not just that we're waiting for the network to be quiet. If we cause damage as penetration testers, and this damage is clear and obvious as we're getting underway with this on a Friday evening, we've got the weekend to get that system back to normal. So if you do find that you have caused some damage, you need to immediately contact the appropriate personnel in that organization and own up to it. Look, we're here doing a penetration test. We are authorized by your executive level. And if you get an IT director, some incident responder, perhaps at a security operations center, really? Penetration test? I don't know anything about this. And I'm the IT director. I think I would know if a penetration test had been contracted. No, not always. Maybe we are testing incident response at that point. So yeah, you've got to have some paperwork that indicates you have permission to be there. And we do need contact information just in case some damage is caused. The damage is never deliberate. Obviously, it is an accident when that happens. We're not there to damage anything as pen testers. It helps if we have some patterns of behavior that we could follow. Standards and frameworks are very important. If you are approaching this from the federal side, if you work for Uncle or maybe for a government contractor, you are probably well familiar with sets of documentation from NIST. This is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's part of the Commerce Department. It was the Bureau of Standards when I was a kid, and several years ago, they changed the branding. So National Institute of Standards and Technology publishes a set of resources, puts them into the public domain. You might notice a number up at the top of this one, SP 800, special publication 800-115. If you take Security Plus, Pen Test Plus, Cybersecurity Analyst, CASP, Certified Ethical Hacker, a CISSP training from us at New Horizons, in all of those that mention penetration testing and similar types of assessment, we will beat you over the head with this document. It is required reading. So you're not in class now, but if you show up in class with me or one of my talented colleagues at New Horizons, I'm telling you, we are going to wear you out about the content of this document. It is the fundamental resource above all others that we use in training for penetration testing. It's not the only way we get this done, but the assumption is if you are viewing this in the United States, and we do occasionally have participants from all around the world, but if we're doing this in the United States, especially in the context of Defense Department activity or perhaps a contractor working with the federal government, you are expected to be aware of these standards published by NIST. And again, this is part of the Commerce Department. So this is one of those bizarre circumstances in which the Commerce Department gets to tell the Defense Department what to do. That's odd, but yeah, it works. They've got this down to a science over at NIST. The institute is called National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have published over 200 of these documents at this point. So just do a quick Google search on NIST SP 800 and leave it at that. And then you will see the big listing of over 200 of these things called special publications. So for the pen tester, it starts here. This is how we do these assessments of vulnerability the federal way. And what we very often see in commercial environments in the United States is if the feds have decided this is a good framework, that's probably going to work for us in a corporate environment. Imagine if you work for a company that's maybe a privately held company, you make widgets. So your widget corp, the leading manufacturer, a small to medium-sized business level, leading manufacturer of consumer grade widgets. And then somebody says, you know, there's some serious cheese to be had if we can make our widgets that are mil spec, military specification widgets, if we can make widgets good enough to be used by the Defense Department, we can get a nice government contract and fulfill the government's widget needs. Great. At that point, we could even go public. We could recruit investment, get listed on a stock exchange. You cash in. Well done. If we get that government contract, even if we're not in the federal government, but if we're going to work with the federal government, Uncle will want to know what you know about the NIST standards, and the Commerce Department is responsible for distributing this stuff. So you consider that to be in the public domain. Anybody can find it. Anybody can use it. So that is your foundation. If we're in class, we start here. And that document is homework. And then we show you some additional standards and frameworks, some of which will come from the private sector. This one is golden. Pete Herzog and his group over at ISECOM published this remarkable resource called the Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual. It is in the public domain. Pete published this under the Creative Commons license, which means we are free to share it. You're free to use it, pass it around. That one thing they ask in the Creative Commons licensing is that you do not break this down to a derivative work. You do not claim this as your own thing, but you're welcome to use it. So credit where credit is due, please, to the remarkable folks who put this work together. And again, there will be a distribution of documents after our presentation today. Some links and some emails and some other things will find their way to you, and you can download all of the documentation. So when this one is called the Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual, certainly we can use open source tools like all of the awesome security tools built into Kali Linux and Parrot Linux and all the awesome pen testing distributions of Linux. That's great. Those are open source tools. You don't have to pay for the tools. But there's something else going on here in this document. As a framework, it's not necessarily that the tools are open source. They generally are, but the methodology is open source. You don't owe Pete and his awesome crew anything for using their methodology. They've released it into the public domain. They say, come get it. Look this stuff over. It may be of some value to you as you prepare for these assessments. Our buddies at OHWASP have also published some remarkable things. This is a piece of homework in Pen Test Plus and cybersecurity analyst and certified ethical hacker training. You have to do a little homework where you read the OWASP testing guide, and these days an updated reference called the Web Security Testing Guide. OWASP is a nonprofit organization, 501c3 nonprofit here in the United States. Nobody makes any money from their involvement in OWASP. And so, yeah, this is where your security geeks hang out, at your local chapters of OWASP, and we participate in the national organization and the global organization. Open Web Application Security Project is exactly what it sounds like. We work with open source tools and open source methods, and we pass along all of the research to help you get better at all of this. And so if you get the credential, Pen Test Plus or Certified Ethical Hacker, and now it is time to actually put this stuff to work in your organization, and you're looking for some guidebooks, you're looking for frameworks, you're looking for step-by-step sets of instructions, in other words, methodology that follows a standard, you're looking at it. You'll download and read some of the documentation from OWASP. So again, those are published under Creative Commons licensing. You are free to pass those things along to anybody in your organization who would get some benefit. And we'll make sure that you do have copies of those. Legal issues. Whoops. Look at what happened here. Krebs reported on this. This was all over the news around the beginning of 2020. Well-known company that does penetration tests with professionals got busted. Whoops. They did their job so well that their activities were indistinguishable from the activities of criminal hackers. Well done. The problem is they got busted. They didn't do anything illegal. They were hired by the government, by the state of Iowa, to actually do this thorough assessment, including penetration testing. And as they got permission to try to enter that government facility, basically they were paid to break in. They were paid to actually test physical security as well as information security. Well, that's exactly what they did. They did what they were given permission to do and what they were hired to do. And somebody misinterpreted that activity, called the police. And yeah, they got busted. These pen testers were taken into custody. The perp walk, the orange jumpsuits, all of it. They were charged with burglary, held on $100,000 bail. somebody figured it out finally. Oh, yeah, these are the pen testers that we actually authorized to do this. So they got out of jail all as well. That was scary. This could happen if you cannot prove that you do have permission to actually be there. You never know when somebody's going to misinterpret your activities. So when we talk about legal issues, disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. I have not been to law school. All of us at New Horizons who are involved in disseminating this material, not just me, but your other instructors who conduct the classes, we're not attorneys. Get legal advice from somebody who is licensed to practice law in the jurisdiction where the penetration test will occur. And when we say in your jurisdiction, this is really important. There's not a one-size-fits-all set of laws where a federal law just applies to everybody everywhere with no adjustments. There are some states. Here's a good example. If you are given permission to test for vulnerabilities in a telephone system, an old PBX system, which is a 20th century technology, still see some of it out there. These days, you're more likely to see voice over IP. And with tools like Nmap and Wireshark and a few others, it's really easy to tell where the vulnerabilities are. And as you are testing for vulnerabilities, you might actually accidentally hear one or both sides of a phone call that was made through voice over IP. Okay, if you have permission to do that, you may be covered legally. But again, I'm not an attorney. And the reason local jurisdiction is so important is that there are some states where it could be legal to listen into a conversation where you are not a participant in the conversation, as long as you can be assured that one of the persons in that conversation is aware that they're being recorded or they're being monitored. Those are called one-party states. In some states, both parties have to understand that they could be recorded or monitored, and rules may be different from one place to the next. So always make sure that you get legal advice locally. The laws may be different across different cities, different states, different counties, tribal areas, even at the national level. There's not a one-size-fits-all set of rules associated with all of this. It is helpful to understand some of the federal background associated with all of this. So there is a document that I will make sure we do get distributed in this ultimate distribution of documents after the presentation related to some of the federal laws here in the United States. So stand by just a moment. I'm going to pull up an image of this. There is a well-known element of our federal government that handles all of this over at the Justice Department. It is called the Computer Crime and Intellectual Property Section, Criminal Division. Why would we even say the word criminal in this context? We're not criminals if we're penetration testers. Well, as we just saw, it is possible that if you do your job really well as a pen tester, you get so good at this, your behavior is almost indistinguishable from the behavior of criminal hackers. So yeah, knowing some of the federal laws related to hacking is always going to be a good place to start. Again, I'm not an attorney, so talk this over with your corporate legal advisor, but I would suggest that you start with this document. So we will make sure that you have that. And it's a federal government document, so it is in the public domain. Let's talk about rules of engagement. This is another one of those things where we will distribute some documents. You will get these after the session. We start with a pen test requirements document when we are in a class like Pen Test Plus or Cybersecurity Analyst or CompTIA Advanced Security Practitioner. We use official courseware from CompTIA, the Computing Technology Industry Association. They've gotten into the courseware business recently to standardize all of this. Their documents are awesome. So in that Pen Test Plus or Cybersecurity Analyst class, where we're talking about scoping out requirements as part of the rules of engagement, this is agreement in advance about how a penetration test will occur. What are the assumptions of the organization contracting with you, ultimately paying you to do the penetration test? What do we expect from them? Is there somebody who can rescue us if we get in trouble? Is there some rules for when these things get done? Do we wait until after business hours as the weekend begins? Are we supposed to be there overnight? Are we supposed to run some exploit fairly early in the business day? all of these decisions have to be made in advance. We have to get these things in writing, signed off on by the appropriate people at the corporate executive level. So this is what we would expect to actually deliver. The pen test meets these requirements. So in that courseware, which is the official courseware that we use from CompTIA, there is a made-up company called the Green City Capital Group. And the Green City Capital Group owns things like what we see here, the Green City Physicians Group. Well, if this is a healthcare environment that is being pen tested, we have to take very special precautions. At least here in the United States, we have a federal law called HIPAA. And this implies that if medical information is compromised, even accidentally, if some information about surgical procedures and prescriptions and lab results, all the information that is necessary to deliver healthcare, if that gets away from Green City Physicians Group, and it's information that could be tied to the identity of an individual patient, whoops, there's some legal trouble. The feds are going to smack them down, and that's going to be painful and embarrassing and expensive in public because it's a violation of a regulation called HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So it's not just we're the pen testers, and we have to be very careful with this healthcare information that we may uncover if we're pen testing Green City Physicians Group. HIPAA compliance might be the reason we were called in the first place. They had a HIPAA violation at Green City Physicians Group. We don't want that to happen again. That's ugly. So the CIO, Chief Information Officer, got fired. They brought other people in to run the network. A senior management was so furious about the HIPAA violation, heads will roll. All right, so they clean house, they get in a new crew who says what the old crew said: trust us, Chief, we're going to do everything we can to make sure we don't get in trouble with the regulators for HIPAA, which would be the Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, as Reagan said to Gorbachev, trust but verify. That's why we are there as penetration testers. I do not expect the executives in charge of the Green City Physicians Group to say, oh, okay, we've got a new IT staff. They say they're going to be compliant, so all is well. No, we're going to verify that with the appropriate technique. So that's what the pen test is all about. Green City Physicians Group, Green City Capital Group, some of the names that you'll see in the documentation shared after the presentation, those are not real. By the way, this is just a demonstration document, and it comes from our buddies over at CompTIA. So we have to get this agreement in advance about what gets tested, what are the circumstances in which these things get tested. So we have to have a scope document. Again, this is part of the rules of engagement. We're going to ask questions like, what are the client's security concerns? What are the reasons for authorizing the test? What type of pen test assessments could be conducted? What kind of threat actors should we simulate? Malicious insiders, criminal hackers on the outsiders, even script kiddies, unskilled juvenile hackers with minimal skill sets. We get absolute clarity in a set of documentation about what gets tested and why and when, and what are the rules that will govern us as we carry out this authorized penetration test. So once all of this is in writing, we go for signatures, signature of the pen test lead. That's you leading the penetration testing team, signature of the representative from Green City Physicians Group. I would love to see a CEO signature on this rather than a technology director, network administrator. Sometimes it's actually them that you are testing. I would also like to see legal advisors signing off on those rules of engagement. So an additional document that we're going to pass along after the session, and again, our marketing folks who set all of this up, Jesse and Terry and that crew, probably have your email address already, but just in case at a certain point toward the end, they may ask you to interact with them a few different ways to make sure we've got a good, current, valid email address. And that's what we're going to use to distribute links to all of those things and push some documents out. So another document that you will see in that distribution is an Excel spreadsheet. If you do not have a copy of Excel, you can probably do this in Google Docs, or there's many open source apps that can work with an Excel spreadsheet. This is the worksheet that is used, and we actually do this in class. This is a lab activity in class where you get some information from rules of engagement and the scope, and you actually build out the spreadsheet. So we know among the team doing the pen test who does what. So there are no unpleasant surprises about somebody overlapping somebody else's authority or too much overlap. That's not going to be healthy. A little overlap is healthy because we all have to know how to do each other's jobs, but we need to assign responsibility for specific phases of the penetration test and know in advance who and what will happen. So yeah, we work with a spreadsheet on that. So you'll see that in the document distribution. It's called Pen Test Team Worksheet Sample. If I built my own, it would look like this. I don't have to build my own because this actually comes from the documents provided to us by CompTIA when we teach those types of tests. All right. One other thing before we send you on a quick break, I have noticed that Jesse has popped in, and Jesse's job is to tell me to shut up at a certain point so we can send you on a quick break, and we will do this here in just a moment. I do want to point out a very important acronym. We will declare exam alert really as the foundation of pen testing. There is no more important concept than this. OSINT, it is called open source intelligence. And on the other side of the break, we'll show you some sources for this, but I need you to think about this during the break. If you were given the task of finding information out that would be helpful in a penetration test, but it's not a white box or a gray box test, if that organization that's paying you says, we're not telling you anything that would be of value in your penetration test because we want you to emulate the behavior of the criminal hacker who knows nothing about our organization, where would you look? You're going to look for things that do not require you to log in and have direct interaction with the target. So it's going to be blogs. It's going to be social media profiles that are not locked down by privacy settings. It's going to be articles that have been published either in the consumer press or the trade press. You will use your search engines a variety of ways. We'll talk about Google hacking here in just a bit. Domain registration records, DNS records, the record keeping behind digital certificates and other important things in public key infrastructure. So many of those sources are in the public domain. And so when we bundle all of that together, we will get a concept called OSINT. It is open source intelligence. And if you take the certification exams like Pen Test Plus or Certified Ethical Hacker, they'll throw that acronym at you in the questions, but they won't spell it out. You'll have to know that OSINT is open source intelligence. So I want to show you a few more things here in the whiteboard, which tend to be testable concepts on your exams that mention pen testing, even if it's not the full thing like Pen Test Plus or Certified Ethical Hacker. Penetration testing is mentioned across many of your security-related certification exams these days, and a major topic of conversation is using the features of your search engines, going above and beyond a consumer level approach to just Googling something. And you know that Google has won the search engine wars when their name becomes the verb. So yeah, Google hacking in this case is not about hacking Google. This is about getting good at using advanced search operators. And these will work in Google. They'll work in Bing and a variety of other search engines. Are not just limited to Google, but they all work roughly the same way. And so in the pen test exams and in your professional practice as a pen tester, you are expected to know some of the advanced search operators to go way above and beyond what a consumer would see when they use the search engine. So you see some of these things. We have a cheat sheet associated with this that we will pass along. We have to call your attention to Whois Records because these things tend to be in the public domain. Originally, Whois was simply a protocol supporting querying of data related to entities registering domains and other internet resources. If you go to GoDaddy or 1&1 or Network Solutions, any of these organizations that allow you to claim a domain name for a limited term, a year, 2 years, 5 years, among the things that you should provide when you register a domain for yourself or you register a domain for your organization, it's billing contacts, technical contacts, and administrative contacts. This is a gold mine of information. And unless that organization has made some effort to hide this information, it tends to be in the public domain. So the example here is CompTIA. itself, Computing Technology Industry Association. By scanning the Whois records, you could tell where they are located. You have a phone number, you have some email addresses, you have some domain name service information. If you drill a little further down in, you'll actually get some DNS information. You get identities of name servers and the associated IP addresses. Those things could be very, very helpful. There is a comment in the private section of the chat window. Somebody is signaling me, asking me if these documents are useful with working for cybersecurity for the EU, particularly in the medical field. I would say no. Once we're beyond the boundaries of the United States and we're out of federal jurisdiction in the United States, you go with the local federal government. In that case, the European Parliament has specified some regulations that would apply to all of the countries in the European Union. So you have the national as well as international approach. That's not what NIST does, but it is a corollary, a colleague, basically. An organization similar to NIST should exist in each of those European countries. And that's where we would look, especially when those medical requirements are in question. HIPAA governs that here in the United States. Published and enforced by the Department of Health and Human Services. There is probably an equivalent of that in each of those European countries as well. And I will tell you this, just in case you're curious about this, and I know we have participants from all over the world. Your CompTIA exams and your EC Council exams, with all of these techniques of pen testing and similar security issues that you get quizzed on, even all the way back to the original A+ from CompTIA. Anytime there is law or regulation mentioned, certainly we acknowledge the international participants, but any mention of federal regulation and federal law will tend to have an American spin. You would need to know about HIPAA, probably more than you would need to know about GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which comes from the European Union. They're both important, but there tends to be an American spin on these exams, and that is because of exactly what we see here in the Whois record. CompTIA is headquartered in Chicago. EC Council is headquartered in Albuquerque, New Mexico. ISC Squared, the CISSP folks, are headquartered in the Gulf Coast of Florida. So when it's time to build the exams and they put the word out to all of their certified folks across all of these organizations, hey, we're looking for subject matter experts to participate in exam development. Mr. Tibb, would you come to CompTIA headquarters and participate in development of Pen Test Plus or cybersecurity analyst? Sure, I'll help my buds over at CompTIA. And we go and we sit around the big boardroom table in the basement. And we do that for a week. And you get paid for that, by the way, if you participate in exam development. But because we're dealing with American headquarters of those certifying organizations, it's a lot easier for American participants to participate in exam development. I don't have to cross an international border to go to Chicago, as I've done many times to participate with this stuff at CompTIA headquarters. When I visit EC Council headquarters, that's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I do not have to cross an international border. So the people who work on developing your exams are sworn to secrecy. They cannot tell you about what happens in that room. And there are probably more American participants than any others because of how easy it is to get to that headquarters. So yeah, there's an American spin. It is not the intent of those certifying organizations to leave out any international participants. The last time we counted, I think we had CompTIA certified pros with A+, Network+, Security+, and all the others. When they ran the numbers, I think they found CompTIA certifications in 151 different countries. That is remarkable when you consider that CompTIA is just a few decades old at this point, and so is EC Council and some of the others. An organization's website is always going to be a great source of open source intelligence. Most websites have a page called About, revealing the purpose and goals and nature of the organization. Could be storefronts, could be awesome sources of OSINT, open source intelligence. You don't have to expect to learn everything there is from one site. You may have to do some deeper digging. Even secondary sites could be helpful if they're set up for purposes like B2B, business to business operations. This can go horribly wrong, by the way, if a related website to the primary site is not well protected. It's not just a source of open source intelligence, it's a source of exploit. Jackpot for the hacker who finds a poorly defended business-to-business portal. And in the courseware for Pen Test Plus and some of the others, we do a little case study with the data breach at the Target stores. I hope they have them where you are, big competitors to Walmart. Target got whacked in one of the worst data breaches ever in retail in the United States. 140 million records compromised, and it happened through this. This is what it looked like at the time. This was the Partners Online portal. Consumers don't see this, but if you worked in a company that did business with Target, not buying their services, but providing services, if you did heating, ventilation, and air conditioning work, HVAC for the Target stores in your city, this is how you got paid. If you provided any product or service to Target that was a business-to-business transaction, this is how you got paid. You logged into the thing called Partners Online. Well, somebody did exactly that for a perfectly legitimate reason. Little HVAC company, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company in a little town in Pennsylvania, logged in to get paid for the work that they had done for the Target stores. They had malware. Whoops. They were depending upon an absolute dumpster fire of a product called Malwarebytes Home Edition. They meant well, but apparently they did not have qualified IT pros taking care of them. And they thought a free piece of software would protect them. Home edition software, it was worthless. And so they had malware. They logged in to get paid by the Target stores for the work that they did. That malware jumped into this poorly defended portal. This was a mess. And that malware percolated all the way down to point of sale systems in the individual Target stores. Before they solved this problem, 140 million transactions were compromised. They should have known better. They didn't have anybody keeping up with this, doing the appropriate penetration testing. Anyone with the appropriate pen testing skill could have looked at that portal, run some tests, and said, wait a minute, this is not well defended. You have a potential for SQL injection. You're not doing input validation correctly. There's any number of problems with this portal, which would indicate if I had criminal intent, I could get some leverage. And that's what happened. This was not penetration tested properly. The code review was not done properly. There were many things happening that were not quite right. Criminal hackers got lucky in that case. The malware percolated out through that portal and caused a mess. It was 140 million records compromised before the problem was solved. And those hackers were there for 6 months doing their damage before they were shut down. Whoops, that's why that is a case study. In Pen Test Plus, Certified Ethical Hacker, and similar classes. It's the misuse of social media very often that gets us there in open source intelligence, because people tend to give up too much information in social media. They tend to trust that things they see in social media are real. And a typical topic of conversation in any pen testing exam, which has social proof in mind. In fact, that's a thing that you may see in some practice questions before we're done. Social engineering can get done through social media because people tend to believe what they see. And so a classic case study is the tragic case of Robin Sage. This did not end well, but it could have been a lot worse. Here's what happened. Robin Sage had a LinkedIn account. And if you were in national security, national defense, and you got a connection request from Robin Sage, you might look at the profile and say, yeah, this is somebody I'd like to be connected to. This is a young professional on the way up. Look at what's going on with Robin Sage. She works as a cyber threat analyst at the Naval Network Warfare Command. Okay, she's got a connection to national security. She's a graduate of MIT. Well done. She appears to be plugged into some good networks. She has several contacts that are fairly well placed in national security and national defense. And so if you are on the receiving end of this request, hi, I'm Robin Sage. Would you like to connect? Would like to join my LinkedIn network, or can I join your LinkedIn network? Okay. And of course, it didn't hurt that Robin Sage was an attractive young woman. You could look into her background, see that she's about 25 years old, and she has this position of awesome responsibility at the Naval Network Warfare Command. And it must be legit because she is connected to some admirals. She's connected to some colonels and generals and majors over in the Air Force and the Army. She's got several connections in the Navy. She is well connected and well placed with a variety of defense contractors here in the United States. So Robin Sage connects to a bunch of people in national defense and national security, some of whom were careless. And some folks on active duty even sent her pictures of where they were working. And you could look at the EXIF data. Somebody shares a photograph. I'm deployed. I'm in the Middle East. And I sent you this picture so you can see where I work, sweetie. And yeah, it was actually possible to tell where those photographs were taken. This could have ended very, very badly for the people who connected to Robin Sage. And you can probably guess where this is headed. There was no Robin Sage. She was not real. Robin Sage is Tom Ryan. Robin Sage is a security researcher who did this as a project, and he pulled the plug on this before any serious damage could be done. And he did a presentation at a conference called Black Hat, which I hope you have some awareness of. Is Tom Ryan a criminal because he spoofed this identity? No, Tom Ryan's a hero in my book. He called out the likelihood that people well placed in national security would actually fall for an attractive profile. So the photograph in the Robin Sage LinkedIn profile is real. That's actually a person. She's an actress. She's got nothing to do with national security and national defense. But Tom put this profile together, made it look real. And the more connections he made to people in national security, the more likely it was that we could connect to other people in national security. So there it is. The Robin Sage example is always mentioned in the material in Pen Test Plus, Certified Ethical Hacker, and others. It is social media gone horribly wrong if there had actually been an exploit. And some of the people who fell for the Robin Sage exploit should have known better, because Robin Sage is the name of a special forces exercise that has been done by the American military since 1945. They put you out in the woods outside Camp McCall in the Carolinas, and you're supposed to put together a counterinsurgency force from the local population. So all of the people locally who live around that military facility are participants. They are hired to either cooperate or not cooperate with the person who has to get the thing done. It's part of special forces training. It has been called the Robin Sage exercise for 71 years. People should have known better. In fact, people in special forces who went through the Robin Sage exercise, who clearly should have known better, some of them actually fell for it. Whoops. So lesson learned in that case. Trust but verify what we see in social media. And because people give up too much information in social media, it is always a very powerful source of open source intelligence. Let us call your attention to a little app called Maltego. Extremely helpful as you are gathering open source intelligence to enhance your likelihood of success in the penetration test. There's a commercial license for this, expensive but worth it, but you could get a free version of the Maltego product. You simply need to go and look for it, and they'll give it to you with a non-commercial license. You could use this for some experimentation. In fact, in Pen Test Plus and Certified Ethical Hacker, Cybersecurity Analyst, and similar classes, we actually do this in a set of virtual machines, and we give you the ability to run Maltego against a variety of social media profiles and other sources of open source intelligence, and it helps you put together the profile. An entire profile of the target, including all of the things that they are connected to. You would fire up some apps and do some network scanning at a network perimeter. This is where your passive reconnaissance now flips over to active reconnaissance. Nmap is going to be the best tool of its type because it's free. There are some commercial products that'll do a fine job, but we do not always assume when we're in the labs, or if you're doing some of your own training for this, especially if you don't have a big budget for hardware and software, it may be possible to get the job done with some free products. Well, Nmap is the star of the show. Absolutely. One of the things that you may see, in fact, you will see, I'll make sure we pass this along. Jesse can email this to you, or we'll have a cloud-based document distribution. There's the Nmap cheat sheet of this. This is not cheating in a negative context, like cheating on an exam. You can't bring the cheat sheets in with you when you take the test, but certainly you would be expected to know some Nmap syntax, and no copyright is violated here because Nmap is free and open source and awesome. Nmap has always been free. It always will be free. So yeah, this is homework. If you are going to pursue everything from Security Plus, even Linux Plus these days mentions Nmap, but especially in the cybersecurity track, Pen Test Plus, Cybersecurity Analyst, CompTIA Advanced Security Practitioner, the CIE SSP exam from ISC Squared, your Certified Ethical Hacker from EC Council, they will all mention Nmap, and they will try to get you to say, which is true, Nmap is probably the best known tool of its type. For doing that scan of the network, we can do Nmap with a graphical user interface. There's also the command line. It's just Nmap. If it's a command line interface, looks like this. There is a graphical user interface called Nmap, which comes along for the ride. So you could use the graphical user interface or use the command line. Usually when you see this on a test, it's more likely to be the command line interface. It's just easier to represent that in the interface for the exam. So in the labs, you do get practice with both the command line and graphical versions of Nmap. So you'd probably see something that looks like this. And in the question on the exam, you see the screenshot, and you have to interpret what you see in the screenshot. We're looking for bad news sometimes. I've got port 80, the old busted port for hypertext transfer protocol. That's the foundational protocol of the World Wide Web. There's no encryption happening in port 80. Credentials would be seen in plain text. There's a lot of bad news happening at port 80. So if this is a well-defended organization, they might limit the use of port 80. They would concentrate on port 443 for their web services. That's the securable version, hypertext transfer protocol secured. But look at the Nmap scan. Port 443 is not listed as an open port. Jackpot. If I am the criminal hacker and I'm looking at this set of web services through Nmap, basically I'm punching in the URL or the IP address, and I reach the conclusion that that's a web server. I see Internet Information Services in Windows, or I see the Apache web server, see any number of web servers. Port 80 is open, but port 443 is not. That's awful. There is no possibility here for encrypted traffic in and out of that web server. It's only the old busted port 80 that's allowed. Yeah, this is an accident waiting to happen. So if you were the pen tester and you saw these statistics associated with the web server, you may reach a conclusion there's any number of attacks possible. If the secure version of hypertext protocol is not allowed, this is going to be minimally protected. Game on. Let us now run some exploits to prove to that organization how poorly they have defended their web services. If you run a scan with Nmap, even just from the local machine where you are, and you scan our IP addresses at New Horizons or CompTIA or the Pentagon or NASA or the White House, careful, please, about scanning government sites with this. But let's assume you've got this copy of Nmap. Even if you do this in a virtual machine, you scan somebody with Nmap. Do they know that you have scanned them? Yep. They don't know you personally. They may not have those identifying details. They may be able to figure some things out according to IP addresses. But what they would tend to see over on their end, if they're paying attention to their logging, they would see the public-facing IP address of where you are. So if I, on my desktop right now, fired up my copy of Nmap, and if I do this in the PowerShell, it would look like this. And so Nmap, and then the thing that we are scanning, if I fire up PowerShell in Nmap, or I use the graphical user interface called ZenMap, or just do this from a classic command prompt in Windows or Linux or Unix or the Mac, the target sees my IP address. It's not the IP address of the workstation. They would see the IP address of my router. They would see the IP address of the piece of infrastructure, the device that gives me exposure to the internet, the jumping off point for my local area network. They'll know which IP address was involved in the scan. Is there a solution? Can you protect your privacy when you scan with Nmap? Yes, you go through Netcraft. This is another thing that we see in the labs. In the pen testing classes and even just basic security classes. If you go to netcraft.com and you find the appropriate element in their website, what's that site running, punch in a URL, they get scanned. The target gets scanned. Did you scan them? Nope. Netcraft scanned them, and then Netcraft generates an HTML page that you can copy, and you can dump this thing into some other app for further analysis. You're not listed in anybody's logs at that point as somebody who scanned a target. Netcraft scanned them on your behalf and then showed you the result. And there are millions of Netcraft scans a day. So if I am the defender of that network and I'm looking at the logs and I see these discrete IP addresses, these script kiddies have scanned us, and maybe these people are skilled hackers, they have scanned us as well. And I see a bunch of scans from Netcraft, could be thousands of Netcraft scans over a period of a few weeks. I'm probably going to ignore the Netcraft scans. There's nobody at Netcraft headquarters that is scanning us. We're just passing through the Netcraft utility. So yeah, this is actually a way that you can hide the origin of the scan. In the private section of the chat window, somebody is signaling with a question: can the use of Nmap be detected, or is it a stealth tool? There are some stealth settings in Nmap. Sometimes you slow the scan down. There's a scripting engine included in Nmap. There are several pieces of Nmap syntax that you can throw in. The way you set the tool up, you can tell it just throw these IP packets at this target once every 5 minutes. Takes several hours to do a scan. And so if you slow the scan down, you are much less likely to be detected. If you do your Nmap scans at a time of day when there's a lot of traffic in and out of the network perimeter. When you see this happen in the movies, there's the hacker with the hoodie in the basement at 2 a.m. running an Nmap scan. No, a real pro is not going to do this at 2 a.m. A real pro is going to do this at 8 a.m. on a weekday, because there is massive amounts of traffic in and out of that network perimeter at the beginning of the business day. The Nmap scan may go unnoticed if it can blend in with other traffic. So in the classes for those certifications, we wear you out with Nmap. We put you in the labs and we give you complete sets of instructions for those things. I will drop a documentation into the document distribution. That would be another very helpful doc. I need you to take a look at your convenience. This one was put into the public domain by the guy who wrote it. Andrew's a good dude, and he's done some amazing work on this. He hasn't updated this in a while, but it does get the job done as an Nmap tutorial. The document looks like this, 20 pages of guidance on how you run this amazing open source tool called Nmap. I'm telling you, it is the most testable application on Security Plus, Pen Test Plus, Cybersecurity Analyst, CompTIA Advanced Security Practitioner, CISSP, from ISC squared, which is supposed to be all about information security management. Nope. There are a few technical things in the CISSP exam these days, and they will wear you out about Nmap because it's so well known. Anybody can download it. Anybody can run it. There's no unpleasant licensing issues. All credit, obviously, to the creator of the tool, and that is Fyodor, Gordon Lyon in real life. Fyodor is a good guy, and he will update Nmap when he feels like updating it, so don't bother him about updating Nmap. But it is extremely well documented, and it is mentioned across all your certification exams these days if there is any focus on security, and that's fair because the tool is free and it is open source. Question in the chat window: how popular has PowerShell become as an attacker tool? PowerShell as that command line replacement these days in Windows. We used to be stuck with the old DOS prompt, which we simply came to call the command prompt over the years. And these days, we would prefer to use PowerShell because PowerShell is scriptable. You can do some automation in PowerShell that you did not get to do in the original command prompt in Windows. And we can even use PowerShell outside of Windows these days. It's been considered replacement for the Windows command line. But over at Microsoft, they've actually opened up the source code for PowerShell. Whoa. So we can now use PowerShell in multiple operating systems. You could even bake it into Kali Linux or whatever your pen testing distro is and use that awesome Windows tool outside of Windows. It's great. PowerShell is extremely well documented over at the Microsoft website. They give away even entire books about PowerShell just to get you comfortable and familiar with the product. So sure, a modern IT practitioner should know their way around PowerShell. Very powerful set of tools built into that. Once we have figured a few things out, oh, Jesse drops a link, by the way, a PowerShell study session. One of my talented colleagues over at New Horizons. These people are wicked smart, as they say in Boston. I have some of the smartest colleagues I have ever worked with in any occupation. They are my buddies in the New Horizons universe, people who do what I do, just in slightly different bodies of certification and qualification. So I'm not the PowerShell pro. Click there and you will get some guidance from the PowerShell pro. This takes you over to the YouTube page. There is Martin. Good dude, does some amazing work. I've known him forever. He is the beast when it comes to PowerShell, and he will show you how to do some of this automation in PowerShell. Good guy. He will give you some good guidance on that. Enumeration. Let's talk about it. Once we have done some scanning, we now take the information we found in scanning and we go a little further with this. This is where our passive approach becomes more of an active approach. Some of this could be accomplished remotely. That's why we really need to make sure that as defenders of networks, we lock down remote access protocols. Port 3389 is a good one to look for in a Windows environment. There's an implementation of terminal services called Remote Desktop Protocol. We have so many people working from home these days. It sounds like remote desktop would be a good thing to have, but it is possible that somebody could compromise a system. If they scan with Nmap, they see that remote desktop port 3389 is open. Game on. They may try to drill in and get additional information from those systems remotely. Some of the information we will get from Enumeration Techniques would be details of operating system, usernames, group names, host names, shares, MAC addresses, routing tables, applications that are installed. Why would an attacker need to know or want to know what applications are used in a corporate environment? This is going to be used for social engineering, not just I'm the attacker and I'm aware that you run these apps, therefore there may be vulnerabilities associated with these apps. What apps an organization uses tends to be insider information. So if social engineering is applied, caller ID spoofing is done, I'm the hacker, I figure out that there's somebody in your organization by this name, by this phone number. Maybe we found this out through LinkedIn or Whois Records. There's a variety of places where you can find these names and phone numbers and email addresses. Okay, I'm the hacker. They don't know that. This is Steve at QuickBooks Tech Support. I'm checking in with you in the finance department over at Spifco International. You're on my list of people that I have to call to make sure that you got the most recent fix for the malware issue in QuickBooks. Malware in QuickBooks? I didn't know anything about that. Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it myself. I'm the new guy on the help desk, so just bear with me, right? That's the reverse appeal to authority. So the hapless tech support representative, Steve, over at QuickBooks is not real. But the non-technical user who's a little confused about all this is going to assume it's real because QuickBooks shows up on the caller ID. Caller ID has been spoofed. Clearly, it's legit. If it wasn't, how would Steve at QuickBooks know that we are a customer of QuickBooks? Or how would they know that we use Salesforce.com? You could figure that out with enumeration techniques. Caller ID could be spoofed. Email addresses could be spoofed, social media profiles could be spoofed. All of these things work together to get that level of confidence that really should not be there. So we get massive amounts of these details valuable to the hacker when we do enumeration techniques. I mentioned earlier the use of an app called OpenVAS. That's homework, friends. If you're going to go after a security credential involving scanning and pen testing, like Pen Test Plus, Certified Ethical Hacker, yeah, we're going to wear you out in the labs with a tool called OpenVAS. It is considered the upstream open source fork of the product called Nessus. Nessus is a commercial product. OpenVAS is free, always been free, always will be free. And it's a beast because some of the same people who developed Nessus are also involved in the creation of OpenVAS. So if you don't have money for an expensive commercial product for your vulnerability scans, it would still be fair to ask you about the use of an open source product. So above all the apps that you would need to know when it comes to running a piece of software specifically designed to scan for vulnerabilities, it will be OpenVAS in class. Therefore, it will be OpenVAS on the test. We mean the test across multiple bodies of certification: CompTIA, ISC squared, EC Council. They all want you to know. You wouldn't see OpenVAS in a Microsoft exam. They'll use their own stuff, like the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. But other than that, we generally will go with an open source product as the example. So there it is one more time. OpenVAS is the Open Vulnerability Assessment Scanner. Very well documented. It is in the hands of a corporate entity called Greenbone Technologies these days, and they are committed to keeping that product free and open source and awesome. Another free open source awesome product you need to know about is called Nikto. And careful, please, when you get a question about this on the exams, plural, exams, Nikto is not about scanning workstations, right? It's not about the things that the end user would have the exposure to. Nikto is all about finding vulnerabilities in your web services. If you have a mobile app, okay, great. Got a lot of magic happening in the mobile platform these days. That's connected to a server somewhere, I promise. You don't generally see self-contained mobile apps capable of e-commerce, using GPS coordinates and similar things. All the spiffy things that we can do with mobile apps these days, even streaming video, this all connects back to servers somewhere. The servers could be virtualized. The servers could actually be real. But in any case, the mobile app, even the app seen through the perspective of the web browser, the Facebook apps, if you run a Facebook app and there's some additional app built into that, some of the games you can play with Facebook, all of these cool things we can do through social media, going through the website or going through the mobile app, every bit of this connects to code running on servers. We're not really to the point where we have a lot of serverless apps in the hands of consumers. There's always servers involved. We're delivering these services through the World Wide Web and other streaming and broadband types of platforms. If there's a server behind the scenes, there may be vulnerabilities. And the way we get to those vulnerabilities in the web server is by leveraging vulnerabilities in the apps as well as direct attacks against the web server. So here's your friend. This is what is going to pay off on your certification exams. If there's a question about exploit against web services. So we're either looking at web apps or we're looking at web servers, trying to find vulnerabilities in both places. The tool is Nikto. There are numerous tools that can get the job done, but just like we saw with OpenVAS and Nmap and a few others, Nikto is free. It's open source. It's awesome. It tends to be built into a lot of your Linux distributions. There's several different ways to run this, but because it's free and because it does such an awesome job shaking those vulnerabilities out of web servers and web apps, it will be the tool of choice in your labs, in class, and in your certification exams. Nobody gets out of the 125 questions in the Certified Ethical Hacker exam without being quizzed about Nikto. You'll see Nikto probably 2 or 3 times in your study for Pen Test Plus and Cybersecurity Analyst from CompTIA. They're going to ask you about this on the exam. So that's another one of those awesome tools that you can find in the big list over at sektools.org, the list that Fyodor put together, the creator of Nmap. manages this survey. Go find it. You can even filter off to the side by web scanners. Okay, I go here and I filter by web scanners, Burp Suite. There's Nikto, number 14 on the list. It's a beast. Go find them, friends. sechtools.org. Many of these things are free and open source. In some cases, if it's not a free open source tool, what you might find in that list would be demo versions. Sometimes there are community editions. Look at number 2 on the list, Metasploit, amazing toolkit for finding and exploiting vulnerabilities, which is what we do as penetration testers. You want that pro license for Metasploit. Yeah, that's going to cost you thousands of dollars for the complete package. What if you don't have thousands of dollars to spend on Metasploit? They give you a freebie to get started. It's called the Metasploit framework, and that's what you see in the labs when we have to do those types of exploits in class. And we always make sure that you have a safe place to do that in sets of virtual machines. So that's a pretty common thing among your vendors of commercial penetration testing products. If you're supposed to license the product to use all the pro features, you might reach the conclusion, I don't need all the pro features. I just need a stripped down version of this thing that will do a few things extremely well. Great. You don't have to pay for the thing called the Metasploit framework. That one is always free. They give that to you to get you interested in licensing the full commercial version. There will always be the exploitation of Wi-Fi mentioned in the certification exams. The star of the show is one called Aircrack. Aircrack-ng.org is where you find it. Do I have that link? There it is. Aircrack-ng.org. Aircrack, like so many of these tools, has always been free, always will be free. What you're looking at here is screenshotted from one of the labs that we do in the Pen Test Plus. We also do this in the cybersecurity analyst class. It takes about a minute to crack that key out of poorly defended Wi-Fi. If the people who set up that Wi-Fi environment have not really paid attention to the better security settings, and they say, okay, we got to select encryption. This is WEP, wired equivalent privacy. I guess that's good enough. Nope. Wired equivalent privacy is busted. There are some well-known weaknesses in that fairly early attempt to protect the Wi-Fi. So tools like Aircrack can take about 1 minute to actually crack that key out of Wi-Fi, especially if you get a laptop enabled for Wi-Fi close enough to the wireless access point, and that laptop is not busy doing a whole lot of things. I do not exaggerate when I say that's about a minute to crack that key. It's just a mathematical brute force of the key. It can happen fairly quickly at the speed of modern Wi-Fi. What if it's not wired equivalent privacy? What if it's one of the later, better flavors of encryption? Aircrack can still get the job done. You might set it up and walk away from it. You come back later in the day, you come back the next day, Aircrack has cracked the key out of that Wi-Fi. And that is a thing that we do in the labs. We don't actually have Wi-Fi on those machines in the labs because they're virtual machines. So the way we generally do this in the lab is that we give you the tools like Aircrack and Kismet and some others, and we populate those labs with pre-calculated packet captures. So it is as if you are on a live Wi-Fi system without actually having the danger of cracking that Wi-Fi in real time. Here is the tremendous boost that you can give to yourself as you study the ethical hacker goodies. It's Kali Linux, Kali, a remarkable distribution of Linux that we tend to use in a lot of the labs. Go get it, friends. Put it on a virtual machine. There's several sets of instructions on how to do this. You can run Kali Linux off of a USB drive. You can actually install it as an operating system. In my traveling laptop that I use for this type of work, I actually have Kali installed as the operating system. I don't need any other operating system. It is loaded with all the hacker tools. It's not the only game in town. In the EC Council material, Certified Ethical Hacker, we now use a Linux distro called Parrot, which has got a lot of the same stuff as Kali. But Kali Linux is generally regarded as being the most full-featured distribution of Linux, loaded with all of the tools that we use for penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, and similar activity. And there is a document that we're going to pass along in the document distribution. And again, if you've provided an email address, you'll get all of these goodies. Can I give you a book about how to do pen testing with Kali Linux? Absolutely, I can. All 344 pages of this, because the authors put this into the public domain through what they call the Creative Commons license. It means you are free to pass this along, give this to anybody who may get some benefit of learning how to work in Kali Linux to do penetration testing. The authors have said, this information is so important. We don't intend to make any money off of this. Just go ahead and pass the thing around. Do not break it down to a derivative work. Don't claim that you wrote it. All credit where credit is due, obviously, to the authors. So yeah, Creative Commons licensing kicks in. And yeah, this is your real world homework, friends. When somebody gets in touch with me, as they frequently do, somebody at a local New Horizons facility will say, Mr. Tibb, could you answer some questions for somebody considering penetration testing certification? Okay. When they say, can you give me a little boost on this? Can you give me a head start? Is there anything that I would need to know, not just in the certification exams, but in my professional practice, if I want to actually use all of these amazing tools in this Linux distribution and find a way to actually get a security assessment done? What am I going to do? What should I expect to see out there in the field? What are the arrangements that need to be made? What is the workflow for getting this stuff done with these amazing tools in Kali Linux? I will say, here's your homework. I'm going to send you this book as a PDF file. You need to turn to page 279, and you need to read Chapter 11, the Introduction to Security Assessments. And it breaks it down within the context of using all the amazing tools in Kali Linux. What are we looking for? How do we set this up? What's the likelihood of that these bad things will happen? How do we take charge of this? How do we get this stuff done if it's supposed to be a penetration test for compliance with some regulation during a more traditional penetration test with no requirements in mind, just looking for vulnerabilities? Could something be exploited? If we are pen testing apps rather than operating systems, how would you do this in Kali Linux? What are the techniques we use for denial of service and web vulnerabilities, password-based attacks, client-side attacks? There it is. Read it, Chapter 11, in this remarkable public domain work called Kali Linux Revealed. Friends, that is the game plan. If you are going to come and take a certified ethical hacker class, a Pen Test Plus class, any of those, if you're going to just study this stuff on your own, there is a tremendous head start to reading Chapter 11 in this work before you read other things. I'd say even before you read the courseware. If you are taking the Pen Test Plus class or the Cybersecurity Analyst class or Certified Ethical Hacker, even though they use a different Linux distro these days, CompTIA materials still use Kali Linux. So I'd say even before you drill into your courseware in preparation for taking the class, you would read Chapter 11 out of this remarkable work called Kali Linux Revealed. So yes, it is safe to pass this along under the Creative Commons license. Anybody can have it. Anybody can share it. The authors intended for that to happen. So we will make sure that you get this document. Jesse drops a link, another one of my really smart colleagues who just scares me. Some of my colleagues at New Horizons are not just wicked smart, as they say in Boston, they're scary smart. And Matt's a good dude, and he does some remarkable work as an instructor of some of this material. He is one of my professional colleagues that I really respect for developing an awesome level of knowledge about this stuff on his own and then being able to present this in the classroom after getting the certifications himself. He'll do a good job for you if you ever end up in a class with Matt. Same is true of the other instructors we've talked about. So Jesse drops a link where Matt uses some of those tools in Kali Linux for a password-based exploit. If you were the defender of the network, you wouldn't call it an exploit, you'd call it an audit. But sure, in the pen test and ethical hacker type of context, that's what you're doing. You're running exploits. So yeah, watch the video. That one's great. And in fact, go poke around in the YouTube channel and you'll see some similar guidance, not just from me, but from my talented colleagues as well.